Welcome to this video on object pooling in Unity using C#. So what's an object pool? To put it quickly, an object pool is a tricky programming technique used to get around using multiple instantiates and multiple destroys during runtime of your game. Why is instantiating and destroying bad while you're doing your updates throughout your game loop? Well, they're very CPU intensive, and if you're developing for mobile devices, you can quickly see a huge drop off in frame rate. So how do we get around that? Well, object pooling is nice in that it instantiates every single asset you'll need in your game at the very start of your game. So all the bullets you'll fire, all the bullets that'll be on screen, all the enemies that'll spawn on screen, all the asteroids that'll spawn on screen will quickly be populated within your hierarchy, and then instead of instantiating and destroying them, you'll just activate them and deactivate them. It may sound a little foreign to you right now, but as I go through, you'll see kind of how this is achieved and how it can kind of work for us. Right now, let's go ahead and look at a bad example of instantiating and destroying within a game. I'm going to go ahead and hit play on here, and keep your eye on the hierarchy right here. Notice how asteroids are created. We have all these clones just appearing in our hierarchy. Notice how our hierarchy is growing, and as the clone asteroids leave the field, they're being destroyed, and our hierarchy is in a constant state of growth and deletion. This is compounded even more when I start firing bullets. We have explosions and bullet models and all kinds of sound effects. They're being instantiated and destroyed. Well, I guess the sound effects are just doing their own thing, but everything else is being instantiated and destroyed. And when we bring in a more complex weapon system like this flamethrower, look at that hierarchy now. It's going crazy. Look how much is expanded. All these calls, you know, seem fine and dandy because, I mean, the frame rate's doing fine here. I mean, we're rocking 70 frames per second. But to be honest, this is a very simple game. It's not populated with many things. The geometry's pretty low. There's not that many materials. So you'll be fooled into thinking that instantiation and destruction is okay. But when you start making bigger games, you're going to start running into bottlenecks with your frame rate. So before you get into making those ambitious games, let's learn some good practices for instantiation and destruction. Alright, so let's go ahead and load into a prototype scene that I have set up. And in this scene I have a lone starfighter right here. And the goal of this scene is going to be getting the lone starfighter here to fire a pre-instantiated pool of bullets out and have them either collide with an object or die after a certain time. So how do we start off by doing this? Well, we have our fighter ship right here. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create an empty game object, and we're going to call this our object pool. This is where all of our bullets are going to spawn. Okay, so we need to get this guy doing something, so let's make a script real quick for it. So let's open up our C# script, and we'll call this our object pool script. Alright, so very obvious that object pool script needs to go on the object pool game object. So let's go ahead and do that now. We can see our object pool script is attached to our object pool game object. Let's go ahead and start editing this code so we can get our array made. I'm going to do some quick cleaning up, get our formatting looking good. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to declare a private game object array. Let's call it objects, and let's set it equal to null. This line basically says, okay, let's make an array of type game object, and let's call it objects. So anytime we want to refer to this array, we'll call it by the name of objects. And we want it to be private because no other script, no other components in the game are really going to be touching, you know, this declaration of arrays of objects we have going on. Alright, so this array is what's actually going to store all of our bullets we're going to make. So that's great. We declared our array. Now let's make a public game object, and let's call it object to instantiate, if I don't misspell something. Alright, this basically sets up, if we look in our object pool now we have a public variable of type game object, and let's just go ahead and make a sphere real quick, and this will be our bullet. Let's reset its transforms. let's go ahead and give it a rigid body, because that's what our mover script I'm going to attach on to it later. That's how it's going to move. And maybe let's adjust our size. That's a good size bullet right there. Alright, and I guess for intents and purposes we can just call this bullet. Alright, so we got it in position of where we want it. We got it the size. We got the rigid body on it. Let's go ahead and drag it and drop it down into just this little folder here to make a prefab for it. Alright, so we got our bullet made, and we have a public game object of the object we want to instantiate. So we're just going to drag this bullet right into that. And this is going to tell our script that this game object, this prefab right here, this bullet, is what we're going to be instantiating into our object pool. So let's bring back our script up real quick. It's looking good so far. Let's make another public variable. This time it's going to be an integer. And let's call it pool size. This is going to allow a designer to basically decree how big or how many objects we want to instantiate in our array. So let's say this is going to be kind of a, I don't know, medium firing weapon. So let's say we want our array size to be 50 bullets big. Alright, so that'll be important in a second. Alright, so we have all of our variables declared. Now let's set up our array. So we're going to go to our void start, and since we've already declared our array and it's called objects, we need to get this array populated. So let's start off by saying objects equals new game object, and inside that bracket we're going to say pool size. This is basically going to get our array ready, set up. It's going to say how big the array is going to be, and now we need to start shoving our bullets in there. Alright, so we're going to do this with a for loop. For loops are really nice because they work well with arrays. So we're going to say for, let's get our count variable set up, set it equal to 0. Our count is going to be less than our pool size. That way it'll go through every single part of the array up till, let's say, 50, and it'll start doing its thing up until number 50, and we're going to increase it by 1 each time we go through our loop. And let's close off our brackets. Alright, we need to do 3 things here to get our array populated. First, we need to actually instantiate our object. So we're going to say objects bracket I bracket. This is basically going to say whatever the I counter is currently within our loop. This is going to point to our position in the array. So starting out, arrays begin with a number 0, remember, not the number 1. Number 1 is actually the second object in our array. So the first part through our loop, I is going to be 0, and so that basically means objects will be 0. That's basically what we're saying on the first time through the loop. But we want to do an instantiation several times through our loop, so we're just going to use that I, and it'll tell our array what position we are in each time we go through the loop. And now we want to actually instantiate. So let's bring up our instantiate function. And remember, it's okay to do this because we're in our start function here. And it's okay to use instantiate at the very start of the game. It may make the game load up a little bit slower, but it's better than the frame rate just going to, you know, crap later on during our game time. So what do we want to instantiate? Well, we want to instantiate our object to instantiate. Remember our public game variable that we dropped our bullet on? That's what we want to instantiate right there. So I just copy and paste that in. And we want to make it a game object. So we'll go as game object. Great. So basically that is what goes through the whole loop. Every time the counter ticks up 1, it's going to instantiate a brand new game object inside of our object array. Now we want to kind of add a line that tidies everything up within our array. If we don't add this line, then all of our bullets are just going to be thrown in randomly in the array. But we want to nest them under our object pool right here. So we're just going to do a quick line of code. Objects I, for every time there's an object in our array, we're going to say objects I dot transform dot parent. And we're going to parent the current object we're at in our array to our current game object that the script is attached to, which is our object pool. This basically just nests everything we make in our pool under our object pool right there. That's just what I prefer. It keeps the hierarchy tidy, so if you're debugging stuff during runtime, you can pause the game and your hierarchy is just not a mess with all kinds of different objects that you've instantiated at the beginning of your game. So one more line of code, we're going to bring up that objects bracket I one more time, and we're going to go .set active false. This is a pretty important concept to get under your belt. Setting active is what's going to be the meat and potatoes of getting our game pool to work. Because remember, we're not actually destroying and we're not actually instantiating, we're just activating and deactivating. So set active and the boolean true or false is what's going to set that attribute for us. So, you know, whenever we create our first object, we don't want it to appear on screen or appear in the game. We only want it to appear whenever we activate it. So we're going to go ahead and set it to false as soon as we get it instantiated within our array. Alright, great. So that's basically, and hopefully I don't get any compile errors. Does not be found in your scene. Objects. And it looks like I just forgot an R there on our transform, so let's save it, and that's what we get. Alright, so let's highlight our object pool here, and let's hit play, and let's see what happens. Immediately we see our object pool right here, and look how many different bullet clones we have now. And they're all kind of dimmed out, so they're basically deactivated right now. That's perfect. So when we start the game, we have all the bullets we'll ever need to use in this game, and instead of creating them and destroying them, we're just going to activate and deactivate them as needed. Perfect. Alright. I'm going to bring that camera in a little bit closer so we can see a little bit better action going on here. There we go. Alright, so let's continue with what we're doing. The next thing we need to be able to do is to activate these objects whenever we need them to. And to do that, we're going to have to create a public function within our object pool class, so we can call this function anytime we need to activate something in our array. There we go. Let's just close it up. Alright, we're going to do this just by using another for loop like above. So just type this baby out. Same, pretty much everything as you saw above. Not that. We want to do pool size plus. Alright, and let's make some brackets for our for loop. Alright. So whenever we call this activate function, we want to cycle through our hierarchy, or our hierarchy or our array, and we want to find the next closest object in our array that's not currently activated. So basically, when we activate, we want to find an object in our array that's not activated. Yeah. So let's do that by saying if objects dot bracket I dot active and hierarchy equals false. So basically saying if objects in our array are false, then let's do the next few lines of code. Set up those brackets. Then we'll say, okay, if this object's false, well, guess what? This object bracket I, let's set active to true. And once I set my active to true, I want to quit looping through my for loop, because I found the one exact object I want to set to active. So let's just return and get the heck out of this for loop. Alright, that's all we got to do to set up our public function to activate objects. Alright, it's not going to really do anything now until we create another script that calls on it. So to do this, let's go ahead and set up some scripts to get this ship firing our bullets. Okay. So before I can fire my bullet, I'm going to add a few scripts I already got pre-made, and I'm just going to add a mover script to it so we can get this bullet moving forward. Let's give it a speed of 5. This mover script is directly tied to my rigid body, so I'm going to quickly move through this stuff. And my sphere collider for it's already set up, so let's just mark is trigger yes, so we can basically get this sphere colliding with other game objects. And let's go ahead and add some code to it so we can get it fired off with maybe our left mouse click like you would in a shooter game. Alright, so let's go ahead and create a script, and this will just be a generic script, and we'll call it activate by, let's get our naming conventions good. So we'll call this activate by fire, and there's only one little trick to getting something to activate with our object pool. Since our activate function's all the way over here in our object pool game object and our object pool script, we need to find a way to access this function from any other function or any other game object in our scene. So we don't need to do an update, we'll just delete that. For this actual class, this script, we're just worried about checking for updates, checking for mouse clicks. So I need to be able to get access to this activate object function, right? So to do this, we got to create a reference to it within the script. So I want to get to this script right here. So the first thing we'll do is, okay, I want to get access to that script, the object pool script. And now I need to give it a local name, a local variable name. So we'll just call this activate. This is the name we're going to use to talk to this function over here. And we're going to set this local variable to game object dot find, and basically we're just going to look for any kind of game object in our game that's named object pool. This is basically going to point to this game object here. It's just a quick way to grab our object pool, and then we're going to get the component on this object pool, and we want to look at the object pool script right here. So this line of code basically sets activate to be able to look at this game object and this script. So that's perfect for what we want. So now we need to check and see if we've pressed the mouse button. So let's just do a input get button, and what do we want to get? We want to get fire 1, which is the left mouse click. And then if that's true, we're going to go activate, because remember this is our local reference we have to our script here. And then now that we have access to the script here, we can just call this public void function, activate object. So I'm going to go activate dot activate object. Remember it's a function, so we got to put those parentheses there. It doesn't return any value, so we can leave it blank. And now hopefully we can fire our gun. Alright, so after we create our activate by fire, let's go ahead and attach it to our ship here. As you can see, we don't have any compile errors, so what this should do is start blasting stuff. Alright, what's going on here? Well, if we look closely, we can see there was an error message in the console in activate fire, and it looks like I had the naming convention for object pool wrong. Remember, it was object pool with no space. So it just goes to show you that syntax is pretty important. I got it fixed, and let's save it out. So let's play it now, and anytime I click the left mouse button, I'm firing my spheres. Alright, but right now they just kind of travel forever. But I want you to notice something within our pool now. Whenever I press the left mouse click, watch how these dimmed out game objects become darkened. And I fired all 50 of my bullets just by holding down the mouse click. So all the bullets don't fire off immediately. Let's do a get button down. So I have to click the mouse button every time I want to fire something. Alright, this changes that auto fire to a semi-auto fire. So every time I click the mouse button, we can see my list grow or become, I guess, highlighted. So this is great, but all my bullets are just continuing to infinity. There's nothing really deactivating stuff. So I'm going to write two scripts that give us an example of how we can deactivate our objects. Let's first do a deactivate by time. Alright, and we're going to attach it to our bullet. So we have a deactivate by time script, and let's just open up the script and edit it. Basically, we're going to say, okay, after a certain amount of seconds go by, deactivate this game object. Alright, so let's go ahead and get rid of our start. Let's tidy some things up. And our public void update, we're going to set that code, but first we need some variables. First, let's make a public variable, and let's call it a float, and we'll call this lifetime. This will allow the designer to go over to our inspector and set how long they want this bullet to last. Alright, and then we're going to create a private float, and we're going to call this our timer. This is going to help us keep track of every second that's passed by since the bullet was activated. And we're just going to do a simple if statement, and time.time gives us the exact second inside the game at runtime we're at. So if 10 seconds have gone by, then time.time is going to stand for 10 seconds. And we're going to say if our current time is greater than our timer plus our lifetime of our object, then we're going to go ahead and execute this code here. And that's going to, first we're going to update our timer equals time.time, so we can get a constant look at our, what current time it is every time the update's called. So we have something for our lifetime to add to. And then we're going to just simply go GameObject.setActive false. So basically let's say every 2 seconds, if our lifetime was 2 seconds, every 2 seconds, or if 2 seconds go by, we're going to deactivate our game object. And here's an important note to take note of. Anytime you deactivate a game object, all of its current values, all of its current stats are going to remain the same. So let's just go ahead and see what I'm talking about here. We want to add our third line of code here. We'll just get in here. We'll go to our bullet, deactivate by time. We'll set our lifetime to 2 seconds. And I'm going to show you an example of what I was just talking about. So we'll fire off a bullet, and after 2 seconds it disappears. But you notice something? It's just picking off the last place it stopped. Not the kind of behavior we want. This is because anytime you deactivate an object, it doesn't mean that all of its values. Let me just show you this. Let's fire off some bullets. So I'm going to pause this, and let's go ahead and select our bullet clone that's currently activated. It doesn't mean that all of these transforms and any other stat you have on it is going to reset to 0. Anytime you deactivate an object, you have to set those values to their whatever default value you want them to be when they were first created. You have to do that manually. So right now we're just worried about our transforms dot position, and we're going to give this a vector 3 and set it back to 0. This is effectively every time we deactivate an object, it's going to reset its transform, its position in the world back to the origin point where it was first created. Very important. And you'll see the difference here in a second. Boom. Deactivated. Deactivated. Now it's always spawning at the first part of our ship. Alright, let's create another type of deactivation script. And let's call this deactivate by collision. And before I get this set up, let's create a cube and let's grow it a little bit, and let's make it skinny. Let's make a little wall. It's a box collider, and we'll go ahead and set that as a trigger. So right now, anytime we fire something, let me set the bullet timer to last a little bit longer. Let's set it to not 410 but 10 seconds. So right now our bullets are just going to pass through our wall and eventually be destroyed after 10 seconds. So it's a good fail-safe to have a destroy by time on our bullets, but not a good way to get them to collide with other objects, because that's kind of the point of a shooter game, right? So let's get Deactivating by collision and attach it to our bullet, and let's just create a simple script that lets us destroy things when they collide into other objects. Let's get this tidied up. boom, and we're really just going to be focused on the update function again. And you can kind of just let's see, we're going to have to basically start a different kind of void update. Let's see, we're not going to make a void update at all. Actually, we're going to do a void on trigger. Let me get this typed correctly. Enter. Collider other. Alright. So this is just a function that checks for any time something enters a collision boundary, then we're going to do the code inside of this. So if our other dot tag equals boundary, then we're going to perform the same kind of code we did a second ago in order to deactivate by time. And in fact, we'll take these two lines of code here and we'll just copy and paste them into that if statement. And instead of checking the time, anytime another object that we're going to tag by boundary, so let's go ahead and tag our cube to boundary right there. Anytime one of our objects collides with this boundary, same thing is going to happen. It's going to go to inactive, and the transform values are going to be false. And we just need to make sure we go in here and set it equals, and I think that'll get it to compile. There we go. So now, whenever our bullets hit this wall here, they're destroyed. And you notice, boom, 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 boom. They're just getting destroyed one at a time. So we're having objects activated and deactivated using the scripts I just showed you. And it's up to you to kind of take these methods and techniques and apply them to whatever situation exists in your current game. And that's really how you can just set up a quick and easy object pool and get it nice and tidy. Remember, we can expand and de-expand or detract there. Everything is nice and organized. We can use this script for multiple different things, since we can just plug in our game objects that we want to instantiate. And it's a very versatile way to set up a game object pool. Thanks for watching. If you have any suggestions or questions, be sure to leave them in comments, and I hope you learned something.